Today we're doing an install on a Yamaha. This will include the 6 and 8 horsepowers. Those kickers started around 2001, 2002. And in 2008, the 9.9s were also in that through current. When you get your motor fitment kit, there will be a small Allen wrench in there. Make sure you save that because that will be needed. You'll have the new linkage with the collar preset. It will need to be adjusted once installed. And you'll have the servo as well. The servo will have the arm already set so that if you turn it counterclockwise, it will be straight out to the right. That is not the idle position. The idle position is after power on, so just keep that in mind before we set this cable. We need to have this unit powered on and it will move to the idle position. This will actually mount right here. If you have a black shroud over electric choke that's in this position, that means your motor is a remote throttle shift and you'll need a different kit. This again is for the tiller handle version. We're going to go ahead and loosen and take off this screw. Our bolt. And this is a 10mm wrench. Once the bolt is off, we're going to go ahead and slide it in here. And then we're going to reposition it back in. If this hose clamp needs to, just bend it back so there's enough room for it to fit. And then we're going to reattach it here. Okay, now I'm just about secured, so I'm going to rotate it so that it's touching on the intake, and then we're going to do the final torque. And again, just snug, and then a little bit more. We're just holding that on there. Now, if this was a factory throttle, there would be a screw in here. You want to remove this set screw. The factory throttle will be a little shorter and it will not have this collar on there, but the removal is the same. So when the set screw is taken out, and you can save that for future use, but you will not need it with this kit. Take your thumb inside and you're going to basically just pull directly out. There's this clip will snap it in place and snap when it removes, and then this will slide out. So if this was your factory throttle linkage, it would look like this, a little bit longer. The new one will have a collar, and when we slide this in, we want to make sure we're sliding it in where there's no threads. So we'll slide that new one in. We're going to rotate this clip so that when we press the the 90-degree in to that hole, the clip is on both sides, and then here I'm just going to press directly in towards the engine and it will click into place. We want to make sure at this point that the motor is at the idle position, so we want to make sure that we're 0% throttle. So we're all the way back. We want to make sure this doesn't cause us any binding. With it in the idle position, we're going to push it all the way forward, and then we're going to put the Allen wrench that was supplied in here, and we're going to adjust this collar, not so that it's pushing against the throttle. We're going to hold it and then leave about an 1/8 inch gap or so that at idle there's no throttle being introduced from the factory throttle. So the idle adjustment screw, which is right here, the screw itself is touching that plate. I can push forward on this linkage and there's a slight gap, about an 1/8 inch or a little less is fine. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to full throttle. And we're going to make sure that we're truly at full throttle, which this bar right here hitting that post is full throttle. So the factory throttle remains unchanged. We're back to idle. I can push forward and there's a little gap here. So there's nothing binding to not allow this motor to go back to idle position from the factory throttle side. At this point, we need to power up and connect our servo. We do not want to do anything with this adjustment cable until after this servo is powered up. Right now, if I use my finger, I can easily move this throttle to any position, or the servo to any position. On the cable, there's a white mark. When you install this cable, you'll cut this where the Y connector or the T connector is going to be bringing power in, and you take that cut end back here at the kicker. These pins you do not want to be pushing through the boat. So what you do is just take the cut end and you're going to route it. And the typical routing is find a grommet that's already existing where you can feed it through. Sometimes a little pull wire in that will help. And then secure it and run it through the boat to the T connector where power is brought in. From there, I'm going to connect this up to the existing servo that we just mounted. The white painted mark to the white painted mark. Now the little boot that comes with this is good to keep on there when you do test the throttle controller before you hook this up. You want to make sure everything powers up, everything looks fine, there's no wiring issue. With it connected, white to white, I'm going to press and hold the power button, and you'll see that the servo goes to the idle position. So the first thing in the controller will do is send the signal to put this in the idle position. Now if I try to rotate this, it will not move. And I'm at 0.00% throttle. We're at idle. On this unit, we're at no throttle input from the tiller. We've got a gap, and the idle adjustment screw is touching. So from here, we're gonna keep the crimp up towards the servo for now, and then we're going to untwist the cable so that we can install it. As you get close to the end, you want to pay careful attention, or a little trick, just rotate it up. Let gravity help hold that crimp in the right position. So at this point, the crimp is still up here. And what we're going to do for routing is we want to go on the outside first of this throttle linkage behind the brass connector. And then we're going to feed it to the inside of the linkage to form a loop. Okay. I'm going to come up on the inside of that collar. And then I'm going to feed it into this crimp. Now there'll be plenty of extra that we're going to cut off at the end. So I want to make sure that it's behind the collar. It's fed initially on the outside of the throttle linkage behind the brass fed around the linkage behind the collar. And just a standard wire cutter, dikes. And you want to be careful using these. If you crimp it at the very tip, you have much easier modulation. If you try to crimp it towards the inside, it will be snug to cut through very easily. So again, I'm just going to put the crimp I'm going to slide it down. And the key here is I don't want to pull throttle where the idle adjustment screw is not touching. And I want to make sure this cable is fairly tight. We have adjustability up here, so I want to make sure that I'm pulling the table to get it tight, push the brass piece back so that I know that we're at the idle position. If the wire is fairly straight, and I want to have a fairly small loop. So at this point, I feel pretty comfortable with that. I'm just do a light crimp there. And there's a little slack here. That's okay. We'll make up for that here in a second. Looks good. All right, I got the first crimp in. I'm going to go ahead and crimp it one more time. And then I'm going to bend this outward and then cut it off, cut the tag line off flush or close to that crimp. From here, I'm just going to grab a piece of paper. You don't need a very wide one. And I'm going to increase the throttle till I can see a gap at this idle adjustment screw and fit the paper in there. This paper is going to act like a feeler gauge so I can tell when it's touching. And then I'm going to back it off until I feel it touch. And right now, I'm at 0% throttle and it's not touching. So I'm going to have to make an adjustment here. Using that same Allen wrench that was provided, I'm going to hold the adjustment, let off the tension. So there's a little bit of slack there, and then retighten. It doesn't take a lot of force to hold that in position. And now we're going to retest it. So again, I'm going to increase the throttle percent on the throttle controller until I see a gap. So I have a gap now. I'm going to put the paper in there, and as I'm backing off one click at a time in the negative, dropping the throttle down, I'm going to go until I feel resistance. Yep, there's resistance. So we come back up. Right there's good resistance. So it's touching at this point. I'm at 5.25% throttle. On carbureted motors like this, 5 to 10% throttle is more than sufficient. Trying to get closer than that, the return spring is not overly strong on these motors. So you want to have enough play in there so that the throttle always goes back to idle so that you're not shifting with an elevated idle. At this point, I can go back to idle. The cable is loose. The idle adjustment screw is touching. And now we're ready to secure our wiring. Put the cowling back on, make sure everything looks good, and we're ready to go fish. Thank you very much.